Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Experience Kills. I just want to point out from the top here, I didn't say hey because I got told off for saying hey at the start of a previous video in the comments this week, and I said hello, not hey. So this is your host Ben, and with me my absolutely inscrutable co-host, it's Richard.
Hello, I'm here. So who told you off for saying hey?
Some random in a comment, from a video from 2 years ago.
On what basis?
I get really annoyed.
Hey?
Every YouTuber says hey when they start a video, and whenever I hear it, I turn off the video immediately. So
okay.
I was just like, I just went, okay.
It's not the most egregious of YouTube intros, is it?
I mean, I thought, I could be like, what's up, peeps? I mean, no, I'm not doing that, am I, or something? You know, I just say hey. But that was 2 years ago, so I don't think I actually say it anymore. But it's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should probably talk about why we're here rather than just the use of the word hey. Today we have convened to discuss the video game that is Pathfinder Kingmaker on the Xbox One. It's a console version of a PC game that's been out for approximately 2 years, and it is the deepest of deep CRPGs that I have played in a very, very long time. By CRPG, I do mean, interestingly, computer RPG, which is what the C stands for there, which basically means this shit is deep. This shit is D&D up in your hizzle. In the kind of vein of like Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate from back in the day. And look, I want to be honest right now, me and Richard are not going to talk about this game from the perspective of huge pen and paper experts. We are not going to talk about the perspective of, this is the genre we focus on. And there are channels that do that and just talk about RPGs and therefore, relate this stuff very specifically to other games of the genre. We're not doing that. We're going to talk about it in kind of a more overview sense, coming at it from, kind of like a lapsed perspective in my regard, because I was big into these games on PC when I was a youngster, but frankly, don't have the time usually to commit to games like this now. And Richard, I know you don't have much experience at all with this genre, no?
Not really. I mean, as far as I go with it, it's Knights of the Old Republic, and that really isn't.
No, it really
one
isn't.
of these, is it?
No.
But, yeah, I think in terms of the interface, we'll get on to that, but there are comparisons.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to actually shout out to something that if you're playing this game, for the first time, you will experience straight away as well, which I was super impressed with the granularity of the difficulty settings, Richard. Now, you could tweak everything about this game, like, couldn't you? Did you go through that interface when you started off as well?
Yeah, I noticed how deep this was from the off, because it gives you a set of preset characters, but then the option of creating your own. And looking into that, it's like staring into the abyss. I was like, no, nope. I don't think I've got the time to even start with that. So I just went with a preset.
So I mean, even before that though, there's like a whole menu about how hard you want to make this game. Did you look at all of that? That was so cool. I thought I was able to like, all right, okay, I don't want the combat to be too difficult because I'm new to this genre. I'm on console, I haven't played this before, but I do want lots of options when it comes to that sort of thing and this sort of thing. So I was able to tweak everything, which I thought was really cool. I'd love to see that in more games.
I don't know. I like how it gives you the option, but it felt really imposing from the off, because it was like, here's a list of stuff that you can change rather than a set of discrete difficulty options, and then you can dig behind it and tweak it if you want. It was very much up front, wasn't it? All of the options are there. Here, deal with this. I was like, what? I don't even know what it is yet.
And that's kind of like coming back to what you were talking about the character creation, isn't it? It's hard to build a character if you're not familiar with the context, if you don't understand the pen and paper source material for Pathfinder, if you've never experienced that before. And I have had the slightest introduction to tabletop D&D, where a friend of mine has run a couple of games specifically for me and our group on a couple of occasions, but it was never like this level of pen and paper. But all I could think of when I was playing this and building my character was how much my friend would love it. Like, honestly, the minutiae, the details, it is just like when you do build a D&D character using the pen and paper mechanics. And that's something obviously that Owlcat here, the developers, have done their utmost to recreate the Pathfinder experience 100% faithfully in video game form, for better or worse. Obviously, this game was a crowdsourced game to start with. I think they went through Kickstarter and stuff like that. And, therefore they know they're making this game for fans of the genre, for fans of the Pathfinder system. So they don't need to make it particularly user-friendly or accessible to, schlubs like us. But, that's better or worse, isn't it? But in our case, we looked at that and was just like, what? But once I started giving myself over to it and, digging into it, and I did build a character from the ground up, but obviously what that means is, with my lack of understanding of the system, I may have built myself a massively hamstrung character who is not going to be able to take advantage of the systems as well as, say, a character who is spec'd properly, min-maxed, to take to be the most effective character possible. I picked a character class I'd never even seen before. In any RPG, I really went for it, in terms of weird build, so I couldn't even tell you what her abilities or class is at this point, just that she hits things quite well. She's good with a rapier. She has a god of choice that I couldn't tell you what it is. She's cool, don't get me wrong, but whether or not she'll hold up in the very end game, I couldn't tell you for sure.
Well, I went for the easy path and just chose one of the presets, but I did change her name and birthday to that of my wife. Just because I was looking for any sense of familiarity. Something that I know, please. So I put my wife in it.
Did you? So it sounds like you just sort of felt a bit adrift in this.
Yeah, I did. I'm really not confident with it, and it's definitely me, not the game. As you say, I think this has been built from the ground up to serve people who think D&D is not hardcore enough, It's really, really a deep experience, and one that I can't get anywhere near the bottom of. But with my time with it, I've appreciated what it does well. I mean, it's really clear from the outset that there is some great characterization in there. Mm-hmm. Everything is voice acted, and you would expect for something of this scope and scale that it might just be text based, but there's a lot of voice acting in there, which is recorded from different styles as well. So you can tailor, obviously, your own character, not just in their name and their specs, but how they speak, and that's recorded differently for each one. The other characters that you pick up along the way are all voice acted as well, and that's reasonably well done. And it does pull you into the story in the opening chapter really well. I thought that, this is an interesting setup, and I would like to see where this goes. Mm-hmm. But it's the mechanics of the thing that make it really hard to keep me pulled along with the story.
Sure.
And I would like to be able to see more of an action-based focus, which there's sort of that in there, isn't there? That you've got the real-time mechanics, but it's not quite real-time. And let's
dig into that. Let's dig into that. Yeah, let's dig into that. Combat is weird. I was expecting more of a one-to-one system, but because of the nature of the party mechanics, it's not really possible. So what you have is these two options, which are straight up turn-based, basically, where you can switch to that as a toggle for that, and then the other option is kind of like an active pause combat system, I guess you would define it as. You're giving more like orders to your squad rather than, wading in and hitting things. And to be honest, on the difficulty I was playing it on, after tweaking it and really getting into it, you can specify AI control on your players and then kind of give them some vague directions, and then you kind of just let them get on with it. You might want to focus their attacks on a specific enemy, but you can basically let them go into combat, and the dice rolls will kick off, and there's cooldowns on the attacks based on like a turn system, but it's all kind of active based, and you sort of feel a bit like you're watching the combat more than.
That was exactly my issue, because I thought, given the choice between turn based and the more action based battle systems, I thought, well, I'm more attuned to action games. I would like to be able to have some level of control over this, rather than it just be a sequence of instructions and then watch what happens. But I did find that even when I tried to use my own input and trigger off the attacks that I wanted to trigger, it didn't really feel any different to just sitting back and watching it happen.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That because there's the action bar as well. So you have you can switch between the characters in your party, and you can key off like major attacks and different types of spells and different types of buffs and, drink a potion. You can do all of that. But even then, it doesn't feel particularly like you're in control of the action.
No.
But that's the nature of pen and paper role-playing games, though. That kind of goes to the source material, that you'll say, I want to attack someone, and then the dungeon master goes, okay, roll your dice, and then he'll say, you attacked that person, you did a critical for 13, you dismembered, you took off one of his arms, he's now down on the floor, do you want to do a final blow? So it's not like you actually doing those things, you are being told about those things. So the game actually represents that, I think, pretty damn well. That is the nature of this type of game. But it is actually less actiony than the Neverwinter Night games, than the Baldur's Gate games, because those were more direct control even then back on the day. And I think it's interesting to play this on a console, because obviously there's no keyboard and mouse, it's all doing it with a controller, so it does feel like they've had to sort of shoehorn that in, but I think they do it quite well. There are infinite amounts of menus in this game. I mean, you can dig around for days. Left trigger brings up all your squad to selection, and then right trigger gives you this sort of selection of cards that represent all the different menus, and there's about 10 of them. So you've got everything from equipment to inventory to character sheets. You've got the option to rest and chill out with your party for a bit and get their health back. You've got formations, so you can actually specify the layout of your companions. So when you go into combat, maybe your range guys at the back, maybe your tank guys at the front, your spell guys on the wing. It's almost like a bloody football sort of formation system. You can really go into it. There's a lot going on in this game, but what I found was that was like you said, Richard, really off-putting in the beginning, in the first couple of hours. But once I really sat with it and immersed myself in it and just gave myself over to this very different style of game, there's nothing really like this on a console, I don't think, except for this. This feels quite unique on console. But once I gave over to it and accepted that what this was, and not what I wanted it to be, it's what it was, I actually found myself really getting sucked into it. And as you mentioned before, the writing is incredibly good. The world building is fantastic. Like the companion stuff is kind of the strength of all of this, is all of that writing. And while everything isn't voiced, not quite, there is quite a lot of stuff that isn't voiced. The key companions, the key quest givers, that stuff is all voiced. And considering this is a pretty small project, it's done to a very, very high standard, and I was quite impressed with all of that. But you can't fault a game for being too accurate to its source, I think. Like you said, it's doing what it wants to do, and it's doing it well. Now, there are some issues, though. I definitely had some technical problems. I had it hang on a black screen more than once when trying to load out of a rest situation. And when that happens, you just have to quit the whole thing and start again and hope you had a relatively recent save. And that's not fantastic. So there is some performance issues there. Also, kind of from a gameplay balancing system, the biggest problem here is the combat, and it is the lack of variety in combat. When going through one of the extensive dungeons in the story quest, you kind of just end up facing the same mixture of enemies over and over and over and over. So you just let your dudes go into the fight, and I ended up sort of sitting there wishing for a fast forward button, like some kind of auto resolve for combat, because while it looks good, the game looks great, and everything's modeled really nicely, the lack of variety means that even I'm not going to pretend to have finished this. This game is absolutely vast, and we've only had it for a week or so, and there's no way I could have finished it for this video. But yeah, even in that time, the combat variety is kind of tiring. There just isn't a lot of difference in those specific areas that you go to. There's difference between them, but when you're in there for what can be hours in one environment, when you're facing the same group of centipedes or kobolds or whatever other kind of enemies over and over again, and then you take them down in the same kind of way, it gets very, very repetitive and therefore kind of boring. Did you find that as well, even in your brief experience?
Yeah. Well, I think the lack of tangible interaction enhances that feeling as well. So it really adds to that feeling of disconnection and almost boredom with the fights. And I will repeat, it's not necessarily the game. I think it's me and what I'm looking for in it. But if I can't have a perceptible input to what's going on, and I'm just watching it, then it needs to look flashier than it does. And I mentioned Knights of the Old Republic earlier on. Transistor is another one where you've got sort of turn-based mechanics that look, for all intents and purposes, like they're real time. And I just feel that this is missing some of that. All it needed is sort of a sequence of a better sequence of moves that are being lined up and what's happening on screen, because it just feels so disconnected. You can set your characters to do particular attacks. You're not quite sure when they've started or finished those attacks, or what the difference between those attacks is, because it doesn't really tell you. So it just feels like that those buttons that you're pushing could be doing nothing and you wouldn't know.
Yeah, feedback. It's feedback. I can appreciate that. And the other thing, what makes great pen and paper roleplay is the dungeon master, right? What makes it exciting is the person that's telling you the tale. For me, I've had 2 or 3 experiences with this in very custom games, and what made those experiences so memorable and so enjoyable was the dungeon master knowing how to keep things varied and exciting and interesting and moving along. If you take that aspect out, all you have is go into combat, roll some dice, see what happens. Go into combat, roll some dice, see what happens. That is not the interesting part of any form of roleplay experience. That's the boring bit you have to get through to get to the fun bit, which is usually character interaction, making choices, doing that sort of thing. Choose your own adventure almost, you know what I mean? And that's the bit that's way more interesting in any kind of pen and paper roleplay experience. And therefore that's the problem here, is that the game focuses way too much on that repetitive dice-based combat. It's just, I've got a character sheet with these stats, I've got the dice that roll to determine that, and they look at that character sheet and the buffs that those give to give you an influence on those dice rolls. And it's just doing that maths for hours in a dungeon becomes very boring very quickly. And it's a shame, because the writing, like we've said, the characters and the choice stuff is really, really good. And we haven't even talked about the whole other element of this game, which is the city building, make your own barony, become a noble person as you progress through the game. It's a whole another level on this game. But even that can become repetitive and slow based, because you end up having lots of sort of activities that come from that situation, and they put pressure on you to put your main quests and your story stuff in the background just to do the busy work of running town. And it's like, that's not necessarily that interesting either, even though the idea of it is really compelling. So I think this game has some really obvious strengths, but just as many obvious weaknesses. I love the fact that it's so ambitious, and by my word, this edition of the game, by the way, also comes with like 3 other campaigns other than the main one as DLC. That's all included. So when you go through your multiple bloody hundreds of hours probably main campaign, you've got a few more to do as well. So it's just a massive package, and it's cool that it exists on the console and that this type of gameplay is now available to console players. It just could have done with some refining, and I know Alcat are working on a sequel now, and they're doing another Pathfinder game. So hopefully, it's going to, double down on their strengths, cut down on some of these weaknesses, and really run with the better elements of this experience. Because at its core, like I said, I was really getting sucked into this. I was really enjoying it in spite of that tedious combat. I was really getting drawn along with the intrigue and the politics and the managing of my town, and really getting into all of that. But there's just, like you said, that feedback loop in combat, especially on a console. I think it would be more forgiving on PC.
Yeah, I was thinking the same with some of the menus. I found it impenetrable, and I couldn't really see a reason for it to be that difficult to get to grips with. Even something as basic as giving a health potion to someone who was just about to be taken out. Couldn't figure it out for ages. Like there's so many menus, there's inventory systems that you've got to wade your way through, and a load of times I've inadvertently given potions to the wrong person because it just doesn't tell you who it's given it to. So you just give them a couple and you think, well, that's done it, but then it hasn't, and your person's taken out.
Inventory management in that game is like almost a separate game of Tetris in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. Within the first hour, I was over encumbered because it gives you so much stuff and no idea of what to do with it. I mean, by the time I found a shop, I'd already had to dump probably 20 swords and a few suits of armour on a road somewhere because I didn't have any way of dispensing with it before I'd found that shop.
Yeah. No, 100%. And the potion thing is a really good example because I had the same problem myself. So you give them a potion, but it just then sits in their inventory. So you have to then go to the potion and tell them to use the potion. Otherwise, they won't heal themselves. Because even though you've got AI switched on, they don't ever seem to heal themselves.
No.
So it's a bit odd, and it's not really surfaced in the tutorial, and it's not really explained, and there's not really an obvious, I don't think there's like a manual you can look at or anything. It almost feels a bit early access in that nature, like that they've got all these features and stuff that are in there, but it never goes through it because again there's an assumption of your level of experience and understanding of the Pathfinder mechanics of pen and paper RPG that is there, for everyone that's playing this game, even though people like us, and I'm assuming quite a lot of other people, will pick this up and be like, just because they think it's an action role-playing game, and have the same experience up and bounce off of it and go, oh my god, this is impenetrable. I'm adrift in this confusion.
But even so, tailor it to people that are well into this stuff already, fine. But that's no excuse for not surfacing the most obvious things. Keeping your squad alive is really important, so why not make it easy for you?
Sure. No. Yep. Definite fair criticism there. I'd give this like a cautious recommendation. Like, be aware of what you're getting into here. Like, be aware of the level of knowledge you either required or willingness that you'll need to learn about all of these systems, because I found myself on wikis and stuff looking up things as I was going along, and if you're cool with that kind of experience, and you do want something that's reminiscent of those old school CRPGs, Neverwinter Nights and Baldur's Gate, which is very clear inspiration here. There is nothing like this on console. There are other role-playing games. There are other high fantasy role-playing games, Divinity and others like that, Pillars of Eternity, but they don't come close to this level of complexity when it comes to the systems at play, to the kind of nature that this is basically a direct translation of a pen and paper system onto your video game machine, right? That is as close as I've ever seen it done. So just be aware of that, and you'll have a good time.
Apologies to anyone that's really into it, because we probably are not the right people to tell you whether it's good or not, I guess. I mean, speaking for myself, definitely not. I would just, I suppose anyone else listening that's on the fence about whether it's for them or not, be careful about what you get into, because it really is a hardcore experience, and if you're not fully dedicated to it, I don't think it will be worth the time. So
that's been Pathfinder Kingmaker Definitive Edition on the Xbox One. Enough subtitles there and colons to confuse anyone, but yeah, I think check it out by Owlcat Games. Like I said, they've got a sequel coming as well. There will probably be another couple of years before that makes it to console. We have been Experience Kills. Thank you for listening to and watching this new video from us. We try and put them up as regularly as possible, and we'll be back soon with more. You can find me at DIYE on Twitter. You can find Richard at Colonel Red on Twitter, and you can find us at Experience Kills on Twitter. We also have a website, www.experiencekills.co.uk, and yeah, you can find all of these videos as podcasts as well on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever a good podcast can be found. So until next time, I'm going to get back into, I'm going to just make my own RPG about Experience Kills, I think. Richard, you can be, shall I be the Dungeon Master? You can play me and I'll play you. How about that?
Okay, well, I'm going to make it easy on myself and go to the fridge for what I like to call a potion.
Good choice. So until next time, we're going to both enjoy some potions. Bye-bye.
Bye.